Welcome back. The head of the Canadian province of Ontario is, listen to this, threatening to cut off electricity exports to the United States.
Canadian official now taking Trump on tonight. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, he is calling for his country to use every tool in our toolbox, a direct quote, including cutting off Canadian energy to the United States.
We read in Politico that Ontario Premier Doug Ford threatened to shut off his province's electricity exports.
It took only one decision, one quiet adjustment on a provincial power board to expose a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. No fiery speech, no executive order, no sudden policy shift. Just a simple 25% surcharge added to electricity exports in Ontario. And instantly, the price of power in New York, Michigan, and Minnesota jumped. It was small on paper, but massive in meaning. Because behind that subtle rise was a message unmistakable to anyone paying attention. A considerable portion of America's industrial strength rests on Canadian energy, and the United States is far more dependent on its northern neighbor than most Americans ever imagined. For years, politicians talked about energy independence as if it were already secured. But the numbers tell a very different story. The U.S. produces 13 million barrels of oil per day and consumes 19 million. The gap is filled almost entirely by Canada, which exports 97% of its oil and gas across the border. Nearly 60% of the oil and gas that keeps American factories running, roads lit, and homes heated comes directly from Canada. That dependence goes deeper than crude. It reaches into the grid itself. That was the context when a threat emerged that sent a chill through Washington. Ontario Premier Doug Ford publicly signaled he was willing to go far beyond a surcharge. If the U.S. moved forward with new tariffs, he could consider cutting electricity exports completely, not gradually, not through lengthy negotiations, just off. A single policy flick and a portion of America's grid would lose a crucial pillar of reliability. He never pulled the trigger. He didn't need to. The message, delivered during a heat wave when the U.S. power system was already straining, was enough. American officials saw it plainly. A single province had the capacity to squeeze the power supply of multiple U.S. states. Even a slight drop in flows would have pushed the Midwest toward reliability emergencies. A few percentage points less, and rolling blackouts could have become a real possibility. Energy analysts had been warning for months that the Pacific Northwest was approaching a power shortage. A report even suggested rolling blackouts could hit as early as the following year. That was before the Ontario surcharge. If Canada tightened its exports by only a small margin, the consequences would be immediate. EV factories, battery plants, and clean tech projects across the American Midwest and Northeast depend on cheap and steady power. A disruption would mean higher costs, delayed production, and weaker global competitiveness. Suddenly, the question hanging over the entire relationship became unavoidable. If a single province can shake America's EV ambitions overnight, what will happen during the next confrontation? Politicians can shout about energy independence, but the reality is quieter, more complicated, and far more fragile. Much of what powers America's factories and cities originates on the Canadian side of the border. In 2023, Canada exported 49.4 terawatt-hours of electricity to the United States, a trade worth more than 4.3 billion Canadian dollars. That made Canada the most significant foreign supplier of electricity to the U.S., dominating imports so completely that roughly 85% of the electricity America buys from abroad comes from Canada. This isn't a marginal supplement. It's a backbone. 86 high-voltage transmission lines cross the border, forming a web of energy infrastructure that connects the two countries. Ontario and Quebec generate more than half of Canada's electricity and control most export capacity. Their decisions ripple straight into the U.S. grid. Ontario alone sends enough power south to serve 1.5 million American households. That's a political fault line waiting for a spark. Once you see the scale of the dependency, the next layer becomes clear. It isn't just about how much power crosses the border, it's about the type of power Canada provides. Hydroelectricity, which Canada produces in staggering quantities, is something the U.S. cannot replace quickly. Canada's hydro system, the third largest on Earth, acts as a massive pressure valve for the American grid. Its reservoirs behave like mechanical batteries. They can ramp up or down within minutes to balance swings in U.S. wind and solar output. When American renewables fluctuate, when gas prices spike, When heat waves push the grid toward reserves, Canada steps in to smooth the curve. That stability is priceless for U.S. EV battery plants, cathode facilities, and lithium refineries. While Europe and Asia struggle with extreme volatility in energy prices, North America avoids those swings because Canadian hydropower absorbs shocks. That's why the U.S.'s early carbon-free grid plans treated Canadian electricity as a foundational building block. It's not intermittent, it's not unpredictable, it's steady. And the more renewable energy the U.S. adds, the more essential Canada becomes. But electricity is just one part of the leverage. Canada is also reshaping another cornerstone of the EV economy: minerals. For decades, Canada was comfortable being a raw material supplier, shipping ore south while the high-value steps of refining and battery-grade processing happened elsewhere. That era is ending. Canada is spending more than 6.4 billion Canadian dollars on strategic mineral and chemical projects. It intends not just to feed the EV supply chain, but to anchor it. By 2030, the goal is to support production for more than 1.3 million EVs annually and feed roughly 100 gigawatt-hours of battery capacity. Canada's new strategy focuses on the chemical midstream, the transformation of ore into active battery materials. This stage multiplies the value of raw inputs several times over. Control the midstream, and you control the leverage. Canada is moving to capture that leverage. This isn't about nationality. It's about power, industrial, economic, and political. Link the mineral strategy with the energy advantage, and the balance shifts again. Clean, stable electricity on one side, battery-grade lithium, nickel, and cobalt on the other hand. Together they influence the marginal cost of every kilowatt-hour of battery capacity produced in the United States. They shape which EV factories stay competitive and which ones fall behind. They determine whether American vehicles meet IRA qualification requirements. Canada is pushing ahead with new direct lithium extraction technologies that convert brine into battery-ready materials. Companies like E3 Lithium and Prairie Lithium are already testing systems that bypass expensive intermediate steps. Combined with domestic chemical plants, Canada could soon send IRA-compliant lithium carbonate and hydroxide to American gigafactories, while keeping the most strategic stages at home. For Washington, the timing could not be more awkward. The U.S. wants to break its dependence on China for battery materials. It wants domestic clean tech production. It wants EV adoption to accelerate. But it doesn't have enough clean power. It doesn't have enough refining capacity, and it cannot scale quickly without Canadian support. If you want to follow these shifting dynamics with us, feel free to like and subscribe.